Whispers of injustice. The dusty Rose Saloon reeked of stale beer, sawdust, and desperation. Lanterns cast a jaundiced glow across the room, illuminating rough-hewn tables scarred with knife marks and spilled whiskey. A haze of tobacco smoke hung thick in the air, clinging to the rafters like cobwebs. Men, weathered and worn by the harsh realities of frontier life, crowded the space. Some nursed their drinks in sullen silence, their eyes glazed over with exhaustion. Others roared with laughter, fueled by cheap liquor and the illusion of camaraderie. A piano player, his fingers yellowed with nicotine, hammered out a tune that was more mournful than merry, a soundtrack to the silent anxieties that gnawed at everyone present. Lily slowed their wagon just outside the saloon, the squeak of the wheels protesting the halt. Daisy gripped Lily's arm, so tight her nails dug into Lily's skin. "Lily, I don't like this," she whispered, her voice trembling. Rose, perched on the edge of the wagon bed, chewed nervously on her thumbnail, her eyes wide and darting. The saloon's cacophony seemed to amplify their own apprehension. Lily forced a reassuring smile, though her stomach churned with dread. "It'll be all right, Daisy. We just need to talk to Mr. Harding. Explain things." She knew, deep down, that explaining things wouldn't solve their problems. Their parents' debt hung over them like a shroud, a suffocating weight they couldn't escape. She climbed down from the wagon, her boots sinking slightly into the dusty ground. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and something else, something acrid and unsettling that she couldn't quite place. "Come on," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Let's get this over with." Daisy and Rose followed, their movements hesitant. As they approached the saloon's batwing doors, a gust of wind swept through the street, carrying with it the faint scent of sagebrush and the unsettling feeling of being watched. The doors swung inward with a groan as Lily pushed them open, and the noise of the saloon washed over them like a tidal wave. Conversations died down, and every eye in the room turned to scrutinize their entrance. The piano player faltered, then resumed his tune, but the melody seemed harsher now, more discordant. Lily led her sisters inside, her chin held high despite the prickling sensation of being judged. Daisy clung to Lily's arm, her knuckles white. Rose trailed behind, her gaze fixed on the floor, as if she could disappear into the sawdust. The room was even more oppressive up close. The men were a mixture of rough-looking cowboys, grizzled miners, and weary farmers. Their faces were etched with hardship, their eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that made Lily's skin crawl. A large, imposing man with a handlebar mustache and a belly that strained against his vest emerged from behind the bar. He wiped his hands on a soiled apron and fixed them with a cold stare. "Well now," he drawled, his voice thick with a southern accent. "What have we here?" A bouquet of roses come to brighten up the dusty rows. Lily stepped forward, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Mr. Harding? I am Lily Cartwright. These are my sisters, Daisy and Rose. We need to talk to you about our parents' situation." Harding's eyes flickered over them, lingering for a moment on Rose, who shrunk back behind Lily. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "The Cartwright girls, eh? I've been expecting you." He gestured towards a table in the corner, shrouded in shadow. "Come, sit. We have much to discuss." They followed him to the table, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. As they sat, Lily noticed a small group of men huddled near the back of the saloon, their heads bent together in conspiratorial whispers. They glanced in her direction, and a shiver ran down her spine. Harding settled into a chair opposite them, his bulk filling the space. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the lamplight. "Your parents," he began, his voice low and menacing, "left behind a considerable debt. A debt which, unfortunately, falls to you now." Daisy gasped, her eyes widening in alarm. Rose gripped Lily's hand so tightly it hurt. Lily met Harding's gaze, her expression unwavering. "We know about the debt, Mr. Harding. We're here to work something out. We have skills. Daisy is an excellent baker. Rose can tell stories that captivate everyone, and I'm a seamstress. Harding chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent a chill down Lily's spine. Skills, you say? Those might be useful in certain circumstances. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. But I'm afraid your skills aren't quite enough to cover what your parents owed. Not nearly enough. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes sweeping over them again, this time with a predatory gleam. However, he continued, his voice dripping with false sweetness, there are other ways to settle a debt. Lily felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She knew what he was implying. She had seen the way the men in the saloon were looking at them. She understood the acrid smell that had been bothering her since they arrived. It was the stench of desperation and greed. What do you mean? Daisy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Harding's smile widened, revealing yellowed teeth. I mean, ladies, that we're going to have an auction. The auction begins. The saloon doors burst inward, announcing Silas Blackwood's entrance like a thunderclap. He possessed an unsettling command, the sort born of wielding power, unjustly accrued. Blackwood, Harding's shadow and the architect of their ruin, surveyed the room. His gaze, sharp as shale, flickered over the sisters, a hungry light in their depths. A cruel curve twisted his lips, revealing teeth too pointed for comfort. Gentlemen, Blackwood's voice sliced through the clamor, a vein of dark amusement running through it. Let's dispense with pleasantries. You all understand the occasion. 3 lovely prospects, ripe for the taking. Mr. Harding, in his magnanimity, offers them as recompense. A rather unique investment opportunity, wouldn't you agree? He swept a hand toward the makeshift stage. Our esteemed auctioneer, Mr. Abernathy, will manage the festivities. Abernathy, the indicated man, inflated with self-importance, puffed out his chest. Spectacles perched on his nose. He gave the assembly a practiced once-over. Right then, gentlemen, let's unveil the treasures before us. Abernathy's eyes lingered on Lily, Daisy, and Rose, a tableau of huddled fright. He launched into his patter. First, we have Miss Lily, a veritable picture of grace and resourcefulness. They say she can repair anything, from torn canvas to fractured spirits. Nimble with a needle, a true domestic goddess. A hot flush crept up Lily's throat. Her skill, formerly a cause for celebration, now felt like a shameful brand. She squeezed Daisy's hand until their knuckles shone bone-white. Next, we present Miss Daisy. Sweet as the confection she creates, I am told. A true culinary sorceress. Imagine awakening each morning to the scent of warm bread. A feast for the senses. Daisy, usually effervescent, seemed to droop. The men's predatory stares made her skin crawl. She yearned to vanish, to be swallowed by the floorboards. And finally, Miss Rose, a weaver of tales. They say her narratives can whisk you to lands unknown, perfect for those bleak winter evenings by the hearth. Rose trembled, her voice trapped in her throat. Her stories were her solace, her means of understanding the world's chaotic beauty. Now, they were mere commodities to be traded. Abernathy cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the sudden quiet. Now, gentlemen, one my bid for Miss Lily, a woman who can maintain your home and mend your garments. A true addition to any household. A raspy voice echoed from the back. $50. Lily's breath snagged. $50. Was that her worth? Quantified? A closer voice parried. 60. The bidding had commenced, a grim countdown to an unknown fate. Daisy clutched Lily's hand, her eyes reflecting terror. Lily, what are we going to do? Lily summoned a brittle smile, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. We'll endure, Daisy. We always do. Abernathy's voice swelled. 70? Do I hear 80? Gentlemen, she's a bargain at this price. Rose whimpered, burying her face against Lily's shoulder. The cacophony, the lascivious expressions, the suffocating sense of entrapment overwhelmed her. The auction for Lily continued, climbing haltingly. 80, 90, 100. Lily experienced a surreal detachment, as if witnessing a stranger's torment. Abernathy, turned his attention to Daisy. Now, gentlemen, let's discuss Miss Daisy, who desires to awaken to the fragrance of freshly baked pies and cakes, who desires a woman who can sweeten even the most bitter day. The bidding for Daisy began at a lower sum, but rapidly increased. Her youth and obvious beauty seemed to fuel the escalating prices. Lily watched, stricken, as men barked bids, their voices thick with avarice. A wave of fierce protectiveness washed over her, a visceral need to shelter her sisters from this degradation. Finally, Rose's moment arrived. Abernathy, sensing the rising tension, softened his tone. And now, gentlemen, Miss Rose, a spinner of dreams, a weaver of words, who desires a woman who can transport you to another realm with simply her voice. The bidding for Rose was initially hesitant. Her youth and delicate nature gave some pause. But then, a hulking man with a livid scar bisecting his face raised a gnarled hand. $150, he rasped, his voice like gravel. Lily's blood congealed. That man's gaze held a fathomless darkness that chilled her to the core. She knew, with a certainty that settled like a stone in her gut, that she had to intervene. But how? The auction proceeded, a macabre mockery of commerce and dignity. Each bid landed like a physical blow, driving the sisters deeper into despair's abyss. The air in the dusty Rose Saloon grew heavy with expectation, avarice, and dread. The magnitude of their predicament descended on Lily, a crushing weight of responsibility. She had sworn to safeguard her sisters, yet here they were, being bartered like livestock to the highest bidder. The auction was in full swing, and she found herself paralyzed. Lily's lost hope. A hush fell over the saloon as Silas Blackwood gestured towards Lily. The smoky air seemed to thicken, clinging to her skin like a shroud. Her stomach churned with a cold dread, heavier than any she'd ever known. This was it, the moment she'd desperately tried to delay. "Miss Lily," Blackwood drawled, his voice oily smooth. "A seamstress of exceptional talent. Why, I've seen her turn rags into gowns fit for a queen." He winked, the gesture predatory, and a ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Lily met his gaze, her own unwavering, a silent defiance burning in her chest. The first bid came quickly, a gruff voice offering a sum that made Lily's heart sink. It was barely enough to keep them fed for a month. Others followed, each one chipping away at her hope, reducing her worth to the stitches she could sew. She scanned the faces, a sea of avarice and indifference. None of them saw her, Lily Cartwright, a person with dreams and fears. They saw a commodity. Daisy squeezed her hand, her knuckles white. Rose trembled beside her, her eyes wide and glistening. Lily forced a reassuring smile, though her lips felt stiff and unnatural. "It'll be all right," she whispered, the words a hollow echo of the promise she couldn't keep. The bidding intensified. A stout man with a walrus mustache and a gold watch chain that strained against his waistcoat declared he needed someone to mend his riding gear. A younger, shifty-eyed fellow leered, suggesting Lily could mend more than just clothes. A wave of nausea washed over her. She focused on Daisy and Rose, their faces etched with worry, and clung to the fragile thread of her resolve. She had to be strong for them. Blackwood's eyes gleamed. "Gentlemen, gentlemen, let's not undersell this fine piece of merchandise." He paused, letting the word hang in the air, a deliberate insult. The bidding climbed higher, fueled by whiskey and lust. Lily closed her eyes for a moment, a silent prayer escaping her lips. She didn't pray for herself. She prayed for her sisters, that they would find some measure of kindness, some sliver of hope in this godforsaken place. Then, a voice cut through the clamor, a voice Lily hadn't heard before, deeper and more resonant than the others. $500. The saloon went silent. $500 was a fortune. Heads turned, searching for the speaker. Lily's own eyes snapped open, searching, pleading. But she couldn't see who had made the offer. Blackwood's smile widened, revealing teeth stained yellow with tobacco. Going once, going twice. He paused, milking the tension. "Sold. To the gentleman in the corner." Two burly men emerged from the shadows, their faces grim. They approached Lily, their hands rough as they took her arms. Panic seized her, a cold, clawing beast. She looked at Daisy, at Rose, their faces dissolving into blurs of tears. "Lily," Daisy cried, reaching for her. "Don't let them take you." Rose wailed, her voice cracking. Lily struggled against the men's grip, her fingers desperately clinging to her sister's hands. "Daisy, Rose, be brave. Stay together. Please." The men pulled harder, separating her from her sisters. The world tilted, the sounds of the saloon fading into a muffled roar. She saw Daisy and Rose being restrained by a woman with a severe bun and an even more severe expression. "I'll find you," Lily screamed, her voice raw with despair. "I promise. I'll find you." But her words were lost in the cacophony of the saloon. The men dragged her towards the back, towards a dark doorway that swallowed her whole. The last thing she saw was the image of her sisters, their faces contorted with grief, their hands outstretched, reaching for her, a vision that would forever haunt her waking hours. The door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. The scent of mildew and something else, something acrid and unpleasant, filled her nostrils. She was alone, utterly, irrevocably alone. The last embers of hope flickered and died, leaving only the cold, hard reality of her fate. Daisy's bitter dough. The auctioneer, a stout man whose voice rasped like sandpaper, mopped his forehead with a beer-tinged kerchief. "All right, gents, feast your eyes on Daisy. She's got a touch with sugar that'll make you weep with joy, and handy to have in the kitchen, too. Who needs a gold mine when you've got baking like this?" Daisy, pale and drawn, stood beside him, hands intertwined as if in prayer. The saloon's air, thick with tobacco fumes and body odor, pressed down on her. She flickered a glance at Rose, who clung to the stage's edge, her young face awash with tears. Daisy offered a weak smile, praying it conveyed reassurance. "So, what bids for this lovely lady, guaranteed to banish hunger and lift your spirits? Her pastries alone are worth a king's ransom." He indicated a plate of her morning's nervous work, biscuits gleaming enticingly under the harsh saloon light. The flaky crusts seemed to mock her plight. A man sporting a waxed mustache and a flour-dusted smock hollered, "$5, just for those biscuits." A wave of laughter rolled through the room, but Daisy felt a cold knot in her stomach. She was more than just her baking. The bidding commenced, a slow trickle at first, then a rising tide as the men assessed her worth. She locked eyes with Rose, her sister's presence a lifeline in the swirling chaos. She shaped the words, "It'll be okay," but they tasted like dust. A booming voice echoed from the back. $20. All heads swiveled to the speaker. A hulking brute, scarred and clad in a greasy vest. He looked like he'd gone 10 rounds with a grizzly. Daisy shrank back instinctively. $25, came the sharp reply from the mercantile owner, a slender man wreathed in lavender cologne. She'd prefer a lifetime of lavender to one whiff of that bear. The bidding escalated, each offer a hammer blow to her dignity. She was reduced to chattel, no different than a bolt of cloth or a sack of potatoes. Her skills, once her pride, now felt like shackles. $50, the brute bellowed, silencing the room. "She'll bake for Brody's. Those cowboys will pay a fortune for a taste of home." He grinned, displaying a row of stained teeth. The lavender man hesitated, then bowed out with a shake of his head. The auctioneer's gavel crashed down. "Sold. To Mr. Brody for $50. Daisy's world crumbled. Brody, proprietor of the most infamous, lawless saloon in the territory. She squeezed her eyes tight, fighting the onrush of tears. Brody lumbered toward her, his gaze predatory. "Come on, girl. Time to earn your keep." He seized her arm in a surprisingly powerful grip. Daisy resisted, digging in her heels. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, let me bid farewell to my sister." Brody's chuckle was a harsh rasp. "No time for coddling. The boys are hungry." He hauled her toward the back exit, away from the stage, away from Rose. Rose's scream, a piercing shriek, cut through the saloon's clamor. "Daisy, Don't leave me. Daisy twisted, her gaze meeting Rose's. She saw raw terror etched on her little sister's face, the abyss of utter abandonment. A sob tore from her throat. Rose, I'll find you. I promise. Brody shoved her through the door and into the grimy alley. The reek of stale beer and decay assaulted her senses. The door slammed shut, severing Rose's cries. Daisy sagged against the rough planks, her body convulsing. The alley was a cold, shadowed world, a stark contrast to the saloon's smoky warmth. She was alone, utterly, but the image of Rose's terror-stricken face seared itself into her memory, igniting a spark of resolve. She would not surrender. She would reunite with her sister, even if it meant a lifetime of baking bread flavored with bitterness. Rose's darkest hour. The air in the saloon thickened, heavy with the stench of stale beer and desperation. With Daisy gone, the already meager light seemed to dim further, casting long, dancing shadows that mimicked Rose's own trembling. Silas Blackwood, his voice oily with false charm, gestured toward her. And now, gentlemen, we have Rose. A wisp of a thing, perhaps, but don't let that fool you. This one has a tongue dipped in honey and a mind brimming with stories. Why, she can spin yarns that'll keep you entertained till the cows come home. And then some. He chuckled, a sound that scraped against Rose's ears like nails on a chalkboard. Rose stood rigid, her gaze fixed on a knot in the floorboards. She could feel the weight of countless eyes upon her, assessing, judging, and desiring. Each glance felt like a physical blow, chipping away at the fragile hope she clung to. Her stomach churned, and the bile rose in her throat, threatening to choke her. She tried to conjure an image of Daisy, of her strong hands kneading dough, of her warm smile. But even that comforting memory felt distant, tainted by the raw terror of the present. Blackwood continued to spiel, emphasizing her rare gift for storytelling, how she could bring history to life, weave fantasies, and soothe a weary soul. He made her sound like a prized possession, a trinket to be admired and coveted. But Rose knew better. She was a commodity, a means to an end, stripped of her dignity and reduced to nothing more than a potential source of amusement. The bidding started tentatively, low murmurs that gradually escalated into bolder offers. A few men, their faces blurred by drink and lust, tossed out bids, their eyes lingering on Rose's slender frame. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying for it to end, for someone, anyone, to offer her a semblance of kindness, a glimmer of hope. Then a voice cut through the din, thick and guttural, silencing the room. $100. Rose's eyes snapped open. Every head turned towards the back of the saloon. Standing there, a hulking figure emerged from the shadows. He was a man carved from granite and weathered leather, his face a roadmap of deep lines and harsh angles. A thick, greasy beard obscured his neck and chest, and his eyes, small and beady, glinted with a predatory hunger that made Rose's blood run cold. A thick layer of dust covered the man's worn clothing, and a heavy scent of unwashed skin and stale tobacco clung to him like a shroud. A collective gasp swept through the room. $100 was an exorbitant sum, far more than anyone had expected to pay for a storyteller, even one as potentially gifted as Rose. Blackwood's eyes widened with avarice. Well now, Blackwood said, his voice regaining its oily smoothness. Looks like we have a serious contender. Do I hear 110? A few half-hearted bids were offered, but they quickly petered out under the settler's unwavering gaze. The man's presence seemed to radiate a palpable aura of menace, stifling any further competition. Blackwood, his face flushed with excitement, turned back to the hulking man. Going once, going twice. He paused, savoring the moment. Sold. To Mr. Call me Jebediah, the man rasped, his voice like gravel grinding against stone. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Rose. And she'll be coming with me now. Rose felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Jebediah. The name hung in the air like a death knell. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this man was not seeking stories. He was seeking something far more sinister, something that would consume her, body and soul. Panic seized her, a suffocating tide that threatened to drown her. She looked around the saloon, desperately searching for a friendly face, a flicker of compassion. But all she saw were vacant stares, drunken smiles, and the cold, calculating glint of opportunism. She was alone, utterly and completely alone. Her legs trembled, refusing to support her. She crumpled to the floor, a broken doll discarded in a den of wolves. The image of Daisy, her face etched with fear as Brody led her away, flashed before her eyes. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, keening sound that echoed through the suddenly silent saloon. This was it, her darkest hour. All hope seemed lost, extinguished by the suffocating weight of her despair. The rancher's arrival. The gavel hovered, a polished menace glinting under the garish saloon lights. Silas Blackwood's smile was a greasy sheen on his face as he surveyed the room, his eyes lingering on Jebediah's heavy purse. Going once to the gentleman in the corner. Going twice. Rose squeezed her eyes shut, the scent of stale beer and desperation thick in her nostrils. Each word hammered at her like a nail in a coffin. She imagined Daisy, her bright laughter echoing in the dusty air, a ghost of happier times. How could this be happening? A thunderous crack ripped through the room, silencing Blackwood mid-sentence. The saloon doors, flimsy things though they were, splintered inward, would flying like shrapnel. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, heads swiveling toward the gaping entryway. Standing silhouetted against the dying sun was a figure that seemed carved from granite. Caleb Stone. Rose's heart lurched. He was a man she barely knew, yet his presence was a beacon in the swirling darkness, threatening to consume her. He filled the doorway, broad shoulders framed by the wreckage. Dust motes danced in the air around him, catching the amber light and painting him in an almost ethereal glow. He was dressed plainly, in a worn leather jacket and denim trousers, but there was an undeniable power radiating from him, a quiet strength that seemed to settle the very air. Blackwood's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of annoyance that quickly morphed back into a semblance of composure. He puffed out his chest, attempting to regain control of the situation. "What in tarnation is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. Caleb didn't immediately respond. His gaze swept across the room, lingering on the faces of the men, cataloging them, assessing them. He saw the mixture of leering anticipation and drunken curiosity, the casual cruelty etched into their features. Finally, his eyes landed on Rose. There was a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, a flash of pain, perhaps, quickly masked by an iron resolve. He stepped forward, each footfall deliberate and measured, the sound echoing in the sudden hush that had fallen over the saloon. "The meaning," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the silence like a knife, "is that this charade is over." Blackwood sputtered, his face reddening. "You can't just barge in here, Stone. This is a legitimate auction. The girl is legally bound." Caleb stopped a few feet from the makeshift stage, his eyes never leaving Blackwood's. Legally bound by a debt she didn't incur, to a system that preys on the vulnerable? I think not. He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm settling the debt." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jebediah, his face a mask of fury, shifted in his seat. He'd been ready to claim his prize, and this intrusion threatened to rob him of it. Blackwood, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, tried a different tactic. He spread his hands, attempting a disarming gesture. "Now, Caleb, let's not be hasty. There's no need for any trouble. We can discuss this like civilized men." Caleb's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. Civilized men don't auction off young women like livestock. Blackwood. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thick pouch, the clinking of coins loud in the quiet saloon. He tossed it onto the stage at Blackwood's feet. "There's more than enough there to cover the alleged debt." Blackwood's eyes widened as he stared at the pouch, greed warring with his anger. He bent to pick it up, hefting it in his hand, weighing his options. The crowd watched with bated breath, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Caleb turned his attention to Rose, his expression softening slightly. "Are you ready to go, Miss Cartwright?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Truth revealed. The silence in the saloon was a suffocating blanket, broken only by the crackling fire in the hearth. Caleb Stone stood unyielding, his gaze locked on Silas Blackwood. The air, thick with anticipation and stale beer, vibrated with unspoken accusations. "You speak boldly, Stone." Blackwood finally spat, his face flushed crimson. "But accusations require proof. Else, they're just the bluster of a meddling rancher." Caleb remained unmoved. "Proof is what I intend to provide. These sisters, Rose and Lily Cartwright, were not fairly assessed. Their father's debt was inflated. You, Blackwood, preying on their desperation, manipulated the figures to your advantage." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jebediah, his face contorted with fury, took a step forward, but Blackwood raised a hand, silencing him. The saloon owner, usually so jovial and booming, now seemed to shrink under Caleb's unwavering stare. "Preposterous," Blackwood blustered, but the conviction in his voice wavered. "The Cartwrights owed what they owed. The books are clear." Caleb reached into his coat, producing a folded document. "These are copies of the original ledgers from the Cartwrights' mercantile account, obtained from a source in Independence. They detail transactions that directly contradict the figures you presented to the court." He held the document aloft, the flickering candlelight dancing across the aged paper. "These ledgers show inflated charges for supplies, phantom debts that never existed, and even double billing. It seems, Mr. Blackwood, that you added your own generous interest to an already burdened family." He unfurled the document, revealing columns of meticulously written figures. Some of the settlers craned their necks to see, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning understanding. Old man Hemlock, who had traded with the Cartwrights for years, squinted at the paper, his brow furrowed. That ain't right," Hemlock muttered, his voice gravelly. "I remember them paying fair for their goods. Never saw no reason for such high charges." Other voices joined his, a rising tide of discontent. The settlers, a motley crew of farmers, miners, and merchants, were a hard bunch, but they valued fairness. Blackwood's slick dealings were one thing, but cheating a family already down on their luck was another. Blackwood's bluster evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. "These documents are forgeries. Fabrications," he roared, his voice cracking. "Stone has concocted a scheme to slander me, to disrupt a legitimate business transaction." "A business transaction built on deceit," Caleb countered, his voice calm but firm. "I also have sworn affidavits from several merchants in Independence who claim that Blackwood routinely undervalued goods received from struggling families, only to resell them at a considerable profit. They were too afraid to speak out before, fearing your influence." He gestured towards Jebediah and a couple of other burly men who were now flanking Blackwood, their faces grim. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Rose, standing beside Caleb, felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. She had always suspected Blackwood's dishonesty, but without proof, her words were meaningless. Now, seeing the doubt etched on the faces of the settlers, she dared to believe that justice might be possible. The tension in the saloon was palpable. The settlers, divided by self-interest and fear, were now forced to choose sides. Some shifted uneasily, avoiding eye contact. Others stared defiantly at Blackwood, their faces hardening with resentment. "Enough," Jebediah bellowed, stepping forward. "Stone, you said your piece. Now get out of here before you cause any more trouble." He reached for Rose's arm, but Caleb blocked him. "The auction is over," Caleb declared, his voice ringing with authority. "I will settle the actual debt owed, as proven by these ledgers, and I will ensure that the Cartwright sisters are treated with the respect they deserve." He pulled out a pouch, letting a cascade of gold coins spill into his open palm. The glint of the gold seemed to mesmerize the room, silencing the murmur of voices. "This is more than enough to cover the legitimate debts," Caleb announced, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the settlers. "And I am prepared to compensate the family for the suffering they have endured at the hands of Silas Blackwood." Blackwood watched, his face a mask of fury. The saloon, once his domain, now seemed to be slipping from his grasp. The settlers, swayed by the evidence and the promise of justice, were turning against him. The auction, the easy profit he had envisioned, was crumbling before his eyes. His carefully constructed facade of respectability was cracking, revealing the ugliness beneath. Freedom's price. The ensuing quiet was a suffocating blanket, woven with incredulity and the slow dawn of realization. Silas Blackwood's countenance, previously etched with self-satisfied arrogance, morphed into a grotesque tapestry of panic and rage. A choked gurgle escaped him, the prelude to a torrent of desperate denials. "Fabrications. All of it. Stone seeks to usurp me, to pilfer what's rightfully mine." His voice cracked, the authority he once projected now dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Caleb, unfazed, scanned the onlookers. He noted the burgeoning hope in Rose's gaze, the cautious trust budding in the hearts of those settlers previously enthralled by Blackwood's pronouncements. Beside Rose stood Lily, radiating a quiet fortitude. Daisy, however, remained conspicuously absent. "I possess here," Caleb declared, his voice resonating through the room, "sufficient funds to cover the legitimate debt incurred by the Cartwright family. Not the inflated, spurious some Blackwood demands, but the accurate amount meticulously documented." He indicated the stack of papers on the table, their fresh ink a testament to his relentless investigation. "I will settle it forthwith, in its entirety, and further, I will recompense the Cartwright sisters for the emotional torment and financial duress Blackwood has visited upon them." A ripple of unrest spread through the assembly, initial disbelief yielding to grudging admiration. To not only clear the debt, but offer restitution, an act practically unheard of. The carefully constructed facade of Silas Blackwood as a generous benefactor crumbled before their very eyes. Blackwood, in a frenzy, surged forward, sending a chair crashing to the floor. "Don't heed him. He's a fraud. These are falsified documents." He lunged for the papers, but Caleb moved with swift precision, his hand clamping down on Blackwood's wrist like a vice. "These are not falsified, Blackwood," Caleb said, his tone a low growl. "These are transcripts from your own ledgers, the originals safely secured. Sworn statements from witnesses who will corroborate your deceptive machinations." He tightened his grip, eliciting a wince from Blackwood. "The game concludes here." He released Blackwood, who stumbled backward, his features twisted into a mask of fury. He swung around to face the crowd, desperation clinging to him like a second skin. "You believe this, stranger? This interloper? After all I've provided for this town?" A weathered farmer, face mapped with the stories of decades of back-breaking labor, stepped forward. "You provided plenty, Blackwood, mostly for yourself." He spat on the floor, a gesture that voiced the sentiments of many. "We always questioned how you lived in such splendor while the rest of us struggled to survive." Another voice cut through the air, belonging to a woman with work-worn hands and sharp, discerning eyes. "My husband lost his farm to you, Blackwood. Said he couldn't meet the payments. Now I'm wondering if maybe those payments weren't quite as demanding as you claimed." The momentum had shifted. The settlers, once intimidated by Blackwood's sway, now saw him for the charlatan he was, a swindler, a leech, a deceiver. The fear that had held them captive for so long evaporated, replaced by a simmering rage and a thirst for redress. Caleb advanced once more, depositing a weighty pouch of gold coins onto the table. The metallic chime resonated in the charged silence, a stark contrast to Blackwood's empty rhetoric. "Here lies the full amount of the legitimate debt," he announced. "Count it, verify it, and let this serve as a warning to all who attempt to capitalize on the misfortunes of others." He turned his attention to Rose and Lily. "You are emancipated," he said, his tone gentler now, more compassionate. You are no longer shackled by this man's deceit. His gaze swept the crowd once more, a flicker of unease clouding his features. Where is your other sister? Rose's face crumpled. Daisy. She was sold to a baker in Oakhaven, a day's journey from here. Caleb nodded grimly. Then our work is not yet done. He addressed the settlers again, his expression hardening with resolve. Blackwood will be held accountable for his crimes. I expect your complete cooperation in this matter. Blackwood stood isolated, amidst the ruins of his shattered dominion. Faces that had once reflected obsequiousness now mirrored only scorn. His reign of exploitation had ended. But as Caleb knew, the battle remained ongoing. Retrieving Daisy and ensuring Blackwood faced true justice constituted the next stage, one fraught with its own perils and uncertainties. The cost of freedom, he realized, demanded constant vigilance. A new beginning. The buckboard rattled to a stop, the dust swirling around Rose's skirts as she hurried forward. Even before she could properly make out the figures climbing down, she knew. That familiar, hesitant way of stepping, the tilt of a head, Lily. And behind her, smaller, but no less distinct, Daisy. Lily! Daisy! The cry tore from Rose's throat, raw with relief. Lily gasped, her eyes widening. Rose! Daisy, ever the optimist, simply beamed. Rose! We didn't know if we'd ever see you again. They rushed towards each other, a tangle of limbs and tearful embraces. The air crackled with unspoken fears and a surge of renewed hope. Lily, always the stoic one, clung to her sisters, her composure finally cracking. Daisy's sobs were punctuated by little gasps of laughter, born of pure, unadulterated joy. Rose held them tight, feeling the familiar comfort of their closeness, the unspoken language of sisterhood that had been forcibly silenced for too long. Behind them, Caleb watched, a rare smile softening the harsh lines of his face. He gave him a moment, letting them rediscover the solace only family could provide. He saw in their faces the ghosts of what they'd endured, but also the nascent strength that had allowed them to survive. Finally, Rose pulled back, wiping her eyes. How did you get here? Lily, still trembling, spoke first. Caleb, Mr. Stone, she trailed off, searching for the right words. He found me, said he knew what Blackwood was doing. He saved me from... She couldn't bring herself to say the words, but Rose understood. Daisy, her face alight with gratitude, finished the thought. He went to Oakhaven and got me. He said he wouldn't let Blackwood get away with it. Caleb stepped forward, his presence both reassuring and authoritative. Blackwood won't be bothering anyone again. He's facing the consequences of his actions. He didn't elaborate, but the grim set of his jaw spoke volumes. The important thing is you're all together now. He gestured towards the sprawling ranch house in the distance, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the afternoon sun. I know this isn't much, but I'd like to offer you all a home here, a safe place to start over. Rose looked at him, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. But what would we do? Anything you want, Caleb said, his gaze sweeping over each of them. Lily, I understand you have a way with animals. We could certainly use your help in the stables and with the livestock. Lily's eyes widened. She had always felt a deep connection with animals, a quiet understanding that transcended words. The thought of working with them, of caring for them, filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. He turned to Daisy, his expression softening. And Daisy, I hear you're quite the baker. Daisy blushed, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her dress. Baking had always been her refuge, a way to bring a little joy into the world, even in the darkest of times. I do enjoy it, she mumbled. Caleb chuckled. Enjoy it? From what I hear, you're a natural. The ranch hands would certainly appreciate some good home cooking. We could even sell your baked goods in town. Make a little extra money. Daisy's eyes sparkled at the thought. Really? I could do that. Absolutely, Caleb said, his voice firm. And Rose, well, you're smart and resourceful. You can help manage the household, keep the books, whatever needs doing. We'll figure out together. He paused, his gaze meeting each of theirs in turn. This won't be easy. Life on the ranch is hard work, but it's honest work, and it's a chance to build something new, something better for yourselves. A chance to be free. The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Each of the sisters was grappling with the enormity of the offer, the weight of the past colliding with the promise of the future. Finally, Rose stepped forward, her chin held high. "We accept," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We'll work hard, we'll earn our keep, and we'll make this a home." Lily and Daisy nodded in agreement, their faces mirroring Rose's newfound resolve. The fear and uncertainty were still there, lurking beneath the surface, but they were overshadowed by a flicker of hope, a spark of determination that had been ignited by Caleb's kindness and the unwavering bond of sisterhood. As they turned towards the ranch house, hand in hand, they knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous. But they also knew that they wouldn't be facing it alone. They had each other. And for the first time in a long time, they dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could finally have a new beginning.